Our next video comes from a senator from Texas and answers the question, what a Ted Cruz presidency would bring opportunity for all and favoritism to none.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Senator Ted Cruz.
Senator Cruz, welcome, and your first question will come from Debbie.
God bless the great state of South Carolina.
Senator Cruz, back in 2007, Barack Obama said he was running for president to tell the corporate lobbyists that their days of setting the agenda in Washington are over. Well, that obviously has not happened. You've spoken a lot about the so-called Washington cartel. How do you actually overcome its influence if Congress doesn't want to play along?
Well, that's a great question. You know, if you look at the Washington cartel, that's the term I use for career politicians in both parties that get in bed with the lobbyists and special interests and grow and grow and grow government. If we're going to break the Washington cartel, the only way to do it is we've got to take it on and we've got to bring power out of Washington and back to the people. And I'll say two things in regard to that. Number one, we've done it before. When was the last time we beat the Washington cartel? And I'll submit it was 1980. The Reagan Revolution. Now, the Washington cartel despised Ronald Reagan. And you look at what happened in the late 70s all across this country. Men and women came together from the grassroots. Many of the men and women here in this stadium rose up like a tidal wave and turned this country around. What my campaign is working to do is the same thing. Build a grassroots army here in South Carolina and across the country to take power out of Washington and bring it back to we the people. And let me make a final point on this. You know, if you look at the debate stage, whether in California or Cleveland, you see the candidates standing there. Suddenly everyone is standing up to the Washington cartel. Now, I think that's fabulous. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Have you noticed that the Washington establishment, they tell us over and over again, every time they run as a conservative. They run as one of us. Not a single person on that stage in California said, I'm a squishy establishment moderate, I stand for nothing. And yet they say if you're actually one of us, you can't win. They're convinced every person in this stadium is unelectable. If you're really a conservative, if you'll really stand up to Washington, you're unelectable. With a test I think we ought to apply. To each of those men and women standing on the stages, that's great. You're adopting rhetoric today against Washington. If you want to be an outsider, fabulous. Show me where you stood and fought against career politicians in both parties.
Senator Cruz, in order to get things done, an effective president needs to have good relationships with Congress. Some reportedly say you don't have good relationships with members either of your party or the Democrat Party in Congress. What do you say to people who don't think a President Cruz can be effective given the atmosphere between you and your fellow senators?
Well, Michael, listen, I will agree with you. If you're looking for someone to go along to get along, if you think Washington is doing great, we need to keep going in the same direction, just kind of fiddle around the edges, then I ain't your guy. But I'm going to suggest to you we've had way too many Republicans whose number one virtue is, I get along great with Democrats. Right now, Republican leadership in Washington seems to be competing for who can surrender faster and more ostentatiously to Barack Obama. And you know, the premise that an effective president is someone who's bosom buddies with the opposing party, yeah, Freud's going to have a field day with that. I would take a minute and assess the presidency of Barack Obama. Listen, if you're a leftist, if you actually believe in socialism, if you believe in diminishing America, if you believe in statist control over our lives, Barack Obama has been the most successful leftist president in history. And last I checked, Barack Obama doesn't spend a whole lot of time spooning with congressional Republicans. If we're going to turn this around, we can't nominate or elect a Republican president who will simply manage the decline of this country. Just once, Republicans should nominate a candidate as committed to conservative principles as Barack Obama is to liberal principles.
Senator Cruz, several of the other campaigns have released very detailed health care plans about what to do after Obamacare is repealed. Some of them have a tax credit to help people buy health insurance. Some of them use a standard deduction. On a policy area as complicated as health care, the details matter. What are the details of your replacement for Obamacare?
Let's talk about it in two pieces, replacement for Obamacare. I want to talk first about getting rid of Obamacare and then its replacement. Now, why do I start with getting rid of Obamacare? Look, we've had 3 elections since Barack Obama was elected. 2 of them, 2010 and 2014, the number one issue was repealing Obamacare, and we won historic tidal wave landmark elections. In between the middle election, 2012, we sought out and nominated the one person on the planet who had actually designed and implemented a plan just like Obamacare. Literally, there are 7 billion people on the face of planet Earth. We could have walked up to anyone, we could have said, "Sir, have you designed and implemented a plan like Obamacare?" "No, you're our guy." And in 2012, we got clobbered. Now, what's happening in 2016? You know, if you look at that stage in California, those 11 candidates there, most of them never utter the words Obamacare. I promise you, if you do not campaign on repealing Obamacare, you ain't gonna repeal Obamacare. The only way we repeal it is if we take on the Washington cartel. I intend to make 2016 a referendum on repealing every word of Obamacare and adopting a simple flat tax. And that's how you break the Washington cartel. It's how you repeal Obamacare, is you come out of 2016 with a mandate from the people. How do you change the incentives of politicians in Washington? You know, there's an old joke that politics is Hollywood for ugly people. My wife says I resemble that remark. The way you break the cartel is you make it politically more risky for elected politicians to do the wrong thing than it is to do the right thing. We make this election a referendum.
Senator Cruz, can you talk about the details of your
I don't want to miss your question, Michael, so let me get to that. But it's important to start with that predicate because most of the other candidates aren't willing to fight the fight to repeal Obamacare. Now, once we repeal it, we absolutely need common sense health care reform. It needs to expand competition, it needs to empower patients, and it needs to disempower government bureaucrats from getting in between us and our doctors. And let me give 3 specific policy proposals that reflect those principles. Number 1, we need to allow people to purchase health insurance across state lines. That creates a true 50-state national marketplace. It drives down costs. If you want more access, you want more choice and lower costs. What does Obamacare do? It's less choice and higher costs. Secondly, we need to expand health savings account so people can save in a tax-advantaged way for health care needs. And third, we need to make health insurance portable, so if you lose your job, it goes with you from job to job to job.
Senator Cruz, let me ask you specifically about the tax credit proposal that some have put out there. Some conservatives, some Republicans think that we need a refundable tax credit to help Americans buy health insurance. Do you support a refundable tax credit as part of a replacement to Obamacare?
Michael, as you know, there have been a lot of ideas put forth by think tanks, by various thinkers in terms of replacements and tax credits. I'm open to considering using the tax code as long as it's consistent with those principles that I laid out, empowering patients. I want the person picking your doctor to be you and not a government bureaucrat.
Senator Cruz, on Wednesday night you said that you regretted your support of John Roberts' confirmation to the Supreme Court. We all know it can be difficult to identify and appoint judges to that court, and so one of your proposals is to have judicial retention elections as a check on those permanent appointments. Wouldn't an idea like this politicize the judiciary? Wouldn't it make them unlikely to go against majoritarian impulses?
Oh, listen, I wish it were the case that we didn't need fundamental reform of the court. If the justices were doing their jobs, if they were following the law, you wouldn't need fundamental reform, something like judicial reelection. But if you have judges behaving like politicians, making policy decisions that they have no authority under the Constitution to do, then they cannot expect to be exempt from the authority of we the people. And Michael, let me expand on this point as well, because this is a great illustration. Think about the debate this week in California. If you asked all 11 candidates, what kind of judges will you appoint to the court? Every one of them would stand up and say, I will appoint strict constructionists who won't legislate from the bench. They'll say that word for word. Those are the talking points every one of their campaigns has given them. Every Republican has said that for 40 years. Let's look at the record. You know, Democrats have batted almost 1,000 when it comes to Supreme Court nominees. Every Supreme Court nominee they put forward votes like a radical leftist nutcase. Republicans, we bat about 500. About half of Republican Supreme Court justices actually honor their oaths and defend the Constitution. The other half are screaming train wreck disasters. Earl Warren was a Republican nominee. Bill Brennan was a Republican nominee. John Paul Stevens, David Souter, Harry Blackmun, who authored Roe versus Wade, was a Republican nominee. If you remember the old Pogo cartoon, we have met the enemy, and they is us. It's important to understand how that happens. I mentioned in the debate 2 moments in time that were particularly important. Number one, in 1990, George Herbert Walker Bush had in one room David Souter, and in another room, Edith Jones, the rock-ribbed conservative on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. George Herbert Walker Bush picked David Souter. Fast forward 15 years to 2005, George W. Bush had in one room John Roberts, and in another room, my former boss, Mike Ludig, the rock-ribbed conservative on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, a man who was Justice Scalia's very first law clerk. George W. Bush picked John Roberts. Now, it's worth understanding why they did it. It's not that they were secretly desiring, I want some big government liberal. It's that both David Souter and John Roberts, they didn't have a paper trail. They'd lived their whole lives, they've never written or said anything to prove they were a conservative, and both President Bushes said, gosh, if we nominate a conservative, we'll have a fight. The Democrats will oppose us, the media will criticize us, and Republicans will get nervous. So let's nominate someone who's never said or done anything to prove they're a conservative. Every time we do that, we get burned.
Senator Cruz.
And I'm going to suggest to you the difference between me and the other very, very fine men and women who are running for president is when push comes to shove, when it comes to the moment to make the decision, whether it is really taking on Obamacare, whether it is standing up to amnesty, whether it is actually defunding Planned Parenthood, or whether it is standing up and putting a principled conservative jurist on the Supreme Court, the difference between me and the other candidates is that I'm going to do what I told you I would do.
Senator Cruz, would it be fair to characterize your position then that because the left has politicized the American judiciary, we should respond in kind? And isn't that throwing in the towel on a pretty important part of the constitutional separation of powers in this country?
Michael, let's be clear. We shouldn't politicize the judiciary. Let me give an example. I'll give an example of a policy matter I care passionately about. School choice. School choice is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. We ought to be willing to fight and to go into every African American community, every Hispanic community, and say every child in America has a right to a quality education regardless of race, ethnicity, wealth, or zip code. Now, Michael, I've fought for that as a United States Senator. If I'm president, we have never seen a president fight for school choice the way that I will. But let me be perfectly clear. No Supreme Court should issue a ruling demanding school choice in every school in America. I agree with that policy position, but the place to advance that policy position is in the elected legislatures that are accountable to the people. No, our judges shouldn't be political. They should follow the Constitution.
Senator Cruz, I'm pleased to bring Governor Haley back onto the stage.
Thank you. Welcome, Senator Cruz, back to South Carolina. We welcome you.
It's a great day to be in South Carolina.
It is a great day in South Carolina. Well, I know we've had lots of fun things to talk about, but I want to go back to the fact that your family immigrated from Cuba. Mm-hmm. And this president has dramatically changed the relationship that the United States has with Cuba. What would that relationship look like under President Cruz?
Well, Governor, you're right, and what Obama has done with Cuba is actually consistent with what he's done with respect to enemies of the United States across this country. For 6.5 years, we've abandoned and alienated our friends and allies. Whether it was the United Kingdom by sending Churchill's bust back right when Obama got elected, or whether it is Israel, with this administration being the most anti-Israel administration in the history of this country. As a foreign minister of a senior ally of ours said to me, it's hard to be friends with America under this president. But at the same time, this president responds to enemies of America with weakness and appeasement, whether it is Putin, whether it is ISIS, whether it is Iran, or whether it is Fidel and Raul Castro in Cuba. What Obama's Cuba deal does is sends billions of dollars to two communist dictators that are oppressing their citizens, that are exporting terrorism across Latin America, and that are 90 miles off the coast of America. If I'm elected president, on the day I'm sworn into office, every two-bit dictator across the globe will know that the days of apologizing for America, the days of bowing and scraping to dictators, that the days of appeasing radical Islamic terrorists are over. It is worth remembering that Iran released our hostages the day Ronald Reagan was sworn into office. And if I'm elected, the world will know America is back.